fifth graders, and welcome back to another The Math Show with Miss Condry. It's getting pretty exciting this week. You guys got your next packet, and it is packet, well, I don't know what number the packet is, but it's Unit 5, and it's Module 4. And there's a couple pages in there, and I'm going to talk about the first one today. But before I do, I want to remind you, when you're doing these problems, and especially when it gets hard, it's easy to kind of have a bad attitude. So we have to make sure we revisit our classroom norms. So even though you're at home and I'm not right with you, please make sure to follow these and to be respectful and have a positive attitude with whoever is helping you at home. Might be important to try and find a quiet place to work because some of these are going to take a little bit more concentration. Remember that if you're not good at it right now, it's just because you need more practice. That word yet is really important. You might not know how to do this yet, but you will with practice. And the nice thing about a YouTube video is that you can watch it over and over again until you understand. So today we're going to work on a page that is found in this packet. It's called Estimate and Check. This is actually a review page. And it reviews back to earlier in the year when we were talking about adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators. It also reviews a lot of the work you did in fourth grade with thinking about and comparing fractions to landmark numbers. So today, our learning target is that you can estimate sums and differences. Remember that word sums means the answer to addition. And that word differences means the answer to a subtraction problem. Okay, so I can estimate the sums and differences of fractions. You're going to find this again on page 203 of this week's packet. All right, let's jump in. The best way to estimate, or one of the good ways to estimate, is to use something called landmarks. And if you're a parent watching, landmarks is something that we use to compare lots of different numbers. And in fractions, the landmarks that we talk a lot about are 0, 1/2, 1. They're fractions, or they're numbers that we can easily compare any fraction to. So we can look at any fraction and think about if it is less than 1/2 or close to 1/2. Maybe it's more than 1/2 or exactly 1/2. And we can do the same thing for comparing it to 1. So is the fraction more than 1, less than 1, close to 1? And those landmark numbers will help us be able to have close estimates. So we're going to give this a try. On this page, you will find a problem. I believe, let's see, what problem is it? Oh, it's number 3. We're going to do number 3 together. And we're going to try this out. Number 3 says 3/8 plus 8/12. And before we do anything, before we solve the problem, we're going to think about what we know about 3/8 and what we know about 8/12. So I'm just going to jot some ideas down. I want you to maybe even pause this video and jot some ideas down about what you know about 3/8 and what you know about 8/12. And we're really thinking about those landmarks. So are they less than 1, more than 1, less than 1/2, more than 1/2, close to 1/2? And try and get as many observations down as you can. If we were having a class discussion, I'm sure I would hear some of you say that you know that 4/8 is equal to 1/2. Well, that's kind of hard to see. Let me use the thicker part of this marker. 4/8 is equal to 1/2. We know that because the numerator is exactly half of the denominator. So if 4/8 is exactly equal to 1/2, then we know 3/8 is just under 1/2. So it's almost 1/2. it's just 1/8 away. So it's pretty much 1/2. Okay, and then 8/12. I would hope that you would think about what 8/12 is and whether or not it's more than 1/2 or less than 1/2. And I might hear somebody say, well, I know that 1/2 of 12 is 6. So that means that 6/12 is equal to 1/2, which means that 8/12 is a little bigger, 2/12 bigger than 1/2. So here you can see we used landmarks and we compared 3/8 and 8/12 to 1/2. And we know that 3/8 is a little less than 1/2 and 8/12 is a little more than 1/2. And so now I just have to think about getting close. So if I were to add something that's a little less than 1/2 with something that's a little more than 1/2, I could expect, I'm going to do a little squiggly equal sign. This means that it's about, it's not exactly equal to. It's going to be really close to 1. Because it's a little less than 1/2 plus a little more than 1/2. And when we do 1/2 plus 1/2, it equals 1. And so I think when we add these, we're going to get pretty close to 1. So let's go ahead and now check our work. So remember, in the last few videos, we've actually done a little bit of work with adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. So this is more review with that. It's really important in 5th grade that you are comfortable adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. So last week in your learning packet, we talked about the least common multiple. I'm drawing 2 ratio tables here, and I'm going to write 3/8 here, and I'm going to write 8/12 here. And last week we did some work with skip counting by 8s and skip counting by 12s to find the smallest multiple that they have in common. And if we were to skip count by 8s, 8, 16, 24, 32, and to skip count by 12s, 12, 24, we would find that we could for both of those numbers, we could land on 24. So I'm going to turn both of these denominators into 24ths because that's the smallest denominator that they have in common. Okay, and we have to keep them equal. So what did we multiply 8 by to get to 24? 8 times 3. We do the same thing to the numerator because if the pieces get smaller, we're going to need more of them. So 3 times 3 is 9. So now we know that 3/8 is equivalent to 9/24. And 8/12, we did 12 times 2 to get to 24. And since those pieces got smaller, we have to multiply these pieces up here because we need more of them to keep it equal. So 8 times 2 is 16. So now we have 9/24 plus 16/24. So I'm going to add those up down here, 9/24 plus 16/24, and that is going to equal, well, 16 and 9 more, 16 plus 10 is 26, subtract 1, 25. So the exact answer is 25/24. Now, let's go back to our estimate. We said it would be close to 1. Well, 24/24 would be exactly 1, and you can see we were just 1/24 off because 25/24 is also the same as 1 and 1 little tiny 24th. So our estimate was accurate. Using landmarks helps us get close so that when we add it, we can see if our answer is reasonable. As you work through these, remember to take the time to estimate and compare those fractions to landmark numbers. You might even consider comparing them to 1 1/2 or 2 wholes, depending on how big the fractions are that you're working with. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to contact me, and I will be discussing this page next week on Teams. Enjoy!